Welcome to Faded Evidence, unraveling the past one clue at a time, with your host, retired detective captain and private investigator, Vince Wallace.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Faded Evidence. This podcast is going to be a continuation of our interview with volunteer worker on the cold case unit, Scott Goodwin. We're going to continue on with the Bernhardt case. We've got a lot more good information for everyone. So welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Captain. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you being here again. Let's continue on. I remember where we kind of left off with stuff, and I want to continue with a few more aspects of this case that are, fairly important to it being solved. Where would you like to start with those topics?
Well, just chronologically, as we were going along, when we looked at the presentation of the homicide, again, organized, disorganized, sophisticated, not sophisticated. Was it random? Was it an overkill? What was it? You then tasked us with vetting many different groups, if you will, including you have to canvass the neighborhood. Where they were was a new neighborhood up in the Heights. Not a lot of homes built up there yet, but we had to canvass, and we interestingly found literally a next door neighbor who had a lot of activity and behavior and history that we looked at very hard.
Yeah, the initial detectives actually kind of maybe zeroed in on him, maybe too much, and overlooked some others. So I wouldn't say overlooked, but they were definitely zeroed in due to his history. But
yes,
obviously was not the person.
Obviously not the person, but again, this goes back to the genesis of cold cases. This gentleman, who, again, I want to say did not do it. It was not him. But at that beginning, he had every reason to be looked at, how would you say it, hard. He was looked at closely for good call. So we looked at the neighbors on all sides.
And we're not talking about current neighbors. When we picked up the case 40 years later, we're talking about
correct
the list of neighbors from the case file from 1973.
Correct. Correct.
A lot of people had moved, a lot of people had died, and so we still had to track those folks down.
Right, and that's a lot of hard, busy, scut work, but you have to do it.
Right.
So then another instance, we had to look at every close friend. Again, referencing FBI standards and statistics, well over 55-60% on cases that the victims know they're murderers. So we had to do close friends. We had a particularly close friend who again looked good. This person had nothing to do with it, as it turns out. But the evidence or the events of the day pointed to him, and we, as investigators, had a duty to look at him.
There was actually and we'd mentioned before, a lot of people, as we looked into the case, that somewhat looked good for it. They had little things here and there that fit, but ultimately no go on those.
Correct. We also had the religious aspect. Church. Was there anybody in their church? You have to look everywhere, understanding that everyone is a suspect. Everyone, until it's solved.
A lot of that came from, where we were zeroing on this was from the profile.
Yes.
And there was two different profiles done. There was one done in the 70s, I believe.
Yes.
And then there was the one done with Douglas and Cooper.
Yes.
In 2018, I believe.
Yes.
So, and that's where a lot of that came from was, we were told to look close.
Yes. And I'm smirking because I'd like to be able to go into some of the specifics, which would be inappropriate, but they were highly, I think you'll agree, they were highly specific about the church connection. Remember?
I do remember that there was a religious component to that.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
And it ends up, again, that while that theory was very interesting, for a lot of different reasons that we can't get into, but it did not end up being our person. But again, here is another whole subset of people that we were charged with vetting, clearing, figuring out.
You know, we were looking close before the profile came out. We were obviously interviewing a lot of coworkers and people that were familiar with the couple closely, so we were close. But we took that to be a little bit further with neighbors.
Yes.
And widened that circle a little bit more than where we were at with just very close friends and family, which started to include coworkers and that.
Yes.
What was interesting about this case that I felt was interesting as well as challenging was the circle of friends. Everybody that was friends were also relatives.
Yes.
Which kind of complicated things in a way that, when, Cliff, some of his coworkers, was family to him.
Yes.
And so that was a unique part of this case as well, that circle.
And we had the internecine jealousies of families.
Right.
And we had people within the families thinking that perhaps a family member was the one who did it.
Right. I mean, I think that's common. I think everybody looks at, especially in 1973. I mean, I think that, the magnitude of this case probably shook up Billings, Montana quite a bit from what I understand.
Yes.
I think that was a huge deal. I think, and some of the people that we interviewed, they were like, hey, listen, am I next?
Correct.
We had people that were, carrying guns around and, sleeping with a gun because they knew the victims. Were they next?
That was a common theme. Am I next?
A lot of people were scared.
Right.
So that's kind of, what people were thinking at the time.
And it was because, again, due to the victimology of this fine young couple in a very lovely brand new neighborhood on a Tuesday night. That's a rape double murder. That's highly unusual. Something is very off here. So people were locking their doors, closing their garages, carrying handguns. They were very, very, very concerned at the time. So what that does for the sheriff's office is everything we've talked about above, all of these different groups, everybody is a suspect. I can't say that enough.
Right.
Everybody, well, it's old, uncle, whatever his name is, or sister such and such, it doesn't matter. Everyone's a suspect until you get the person that did it. Because as Reserve Deputy Wallace says, we're wrong all the time until we're right. And, we also had one last thing. We had an anonymous tip talking about Vietnam, but that proved to be nothing as well. But we had to look at that because of Clifford's service duty time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, this is just such a weird dynamic in this case of the intertwined coworkers, family, all sorts of different aspects played into this case that made it what I feel was extremely challenging case. It was very intricate and also led to a lot of why we ended up putting a buccal swab in several people's mouths.
Yes.
A lot of the males that we came in contact with in interviews in this case that, was in that small circle, we were sticking a buccal swab. We were taking one from them.
Yes.
If they gave it. And like you mentioned the stats on that earlier, very few people turned that down, but that's another reason why that happened.
Yes. And also remembering at that time that and it's a cultural thing, an age, generational thing, I should say. I'm sorry. What do you mean you want my DNA? There's very much hesitancy.
Most did not question it, though. I mean, the majority. The vast majority of people are like, hey, anything I can do to help.
Right.
And the ones that didn't, I mean, I didn't look at it as they were more suspect. I looked at it like you just mentioned, a generational thing, or they just don't understand, or maybe they were hiding something that had happened in the past. Who knows?
Right.
You can't hold it against them. It was their right to say no.
Legally and morally, you're right.
Exactly.
The other thing I was going to mention, Captain, about that night was there was an event planned that night. This is another big part of our investigation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That there's so many to your audience. I'm speaking to your audience now. There are so many twists and turns, like say about that night's events, which are way too long to get into here, but had big impact on us trying to figure out this case.
Added to the complexity of it by far.
By far. And some of the things that happen, folks, are just so coincidental that it makes an investigator who does not believe in any coincidences in this life, just makes an investigator have to question, why did this happen? How could this person know this? So on. And some of it is just dumb luck. Things happen in these murder cases that we're never going to know the answer to.
Yeah, and we touched on that earlier, that, we got to the end of it, obviously solved it, and looking at the facts of the case, we're able to come up with theories that occurred, but really exactly what happened, we won't know, and that happens on cold cases.
Yes.
And actually any case, that you work, that's not an unheard of thing. But the complexity of this case was absolutely, overwhelming at points in time with the amount of information, not so much in tips that we got, but in the actual amount of information that had been gathered over the years, fulfilling eight binders, I think it was at the time, or maybe more.
Yes.
I don't know if you went through the statistics on how many employees there was in each of their workplaces. Did you touch on that?
I did, but it's good to bring it back up because it just shows you what was on the table for us. Off the top of my head, it was 118 co-workers at Ryan's Grocery and 67 co-workers at Quality Concrete where Clifford was. Okay. And as it happened, to your audience again, we had to the best of our ability, vet every one of them as best we could. Obviously, we're looking for a male. This is a sexual assault, but it's very difficult because by the time the case rolled around, many of these people were deceased.
Right.
But you're still trying to make contact with loved ones, family. I can't tell you how many times we were going down holes on employment records. Again, many of which were disappeared. And I would say to your audience again that that standard best practices of a law enforcement agency paid off in this case. Why? Because our suspect was a co-worker of Linda Bernhardt. And that's a fact. And that came to pass. Now, would we have found that? That's the next part of our conversation here.
Yeah, I do want to go there. I wanted to start maybe with, we initially had the STR DNA profile. Where we went as technology developed, we started with Ancestry.
Yes.
And that was the next part. After the STR, I think we hit Ancestry next.
Yes.
And then I think it was phenotype after that, and genetic genealogy after that. So touch on the Ancestry part of it a little bit. I honestly, my personal opinion of it was, minimal at best.
Yes.
Is the way I would describe it.
It was a new frontier.
Right.
We were trying to learn on the go, learn as we went.
Right.
And we ended up with two very wonderful, well-meaning, well-intended individuals who were doing their darndest and their best to help us, and in essence gave us some good familial information, some good ancestral descendant information. Ended up that we had been told, again with all best intentions, that we could be, and I'm quoting, we could be, quote, 99% certain that your suspect is of Irish ancestry and descent. And not only, which got me, as I was wont to do, got very excited. And I was then further told by the ancestry person that not only were they Irish, but they were from the south of Ireland.
Right.
And they were on the coast. And they gave a specific city on the southern coastal portion of Ireland.
I remember once we got that information, pulling all of the counties in that area of
County Cork.
that,
Yep.
there and all of that area. And
Yep.
then pulling surnames and looking at
Yes.
surnames, comparing them to, the people that were involved in this list and in this casebook.
Yes.
I mean, that's kind of the things that you do. You go through steps like that. But I picked the most popular ones. I mean, I did a search for the top 25 surnames. I mean, just playing probability here.
That's right.
Through the casebook, and then we went, to the next 25, and yeah, it came up to be somewhat inaccurate.
Well, and that's where I'll step in and say that that was a phenomenal amount of work.
Yes.
To your audience. It's a tremendous amount of actual work trying to vet that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the punchline, of course, and again, these were two wonderful people that did their best, but the punchline is our suspect was not of Irish extraction. Our suspect is Scottish.
Yeah.
Clear delineation on Scottish.
Let's move into that, because I believe that came up when we did the phenotyping.
Yes.
Yes,
sir.
Yeah, we had phenotyping done. So we went from the ancestry part to the phenotyping.
Yes.
And this is as technology was rolling through.
Yes.
We were doing this, keeping up on it to date. And we did the phenotyping, and that came up with some good information that allowed us to take people that didn't quite fit the phenotype and put them to the bottom of the stack of suspects. But go ahead and touch on that if you want.
And Captain, your audience should know that what this is, and we're learning as we go. We're not scientists, we're learning as we go, okay? And it ends up that these SNPs, as part of this process, creates a phenotyping snapshot, it's called. And it actually shows your person of interest as if it was a composite, and it has the things that just took us to the next step in this investigation, literally. I'll never forget that day, where you see a snapshot, a composite, if you will, and you're going, oh, this is wonderful. I'm going to show it to family and friends and coworkers, and they're going to all immediately go, oh, that's Bob Jones or Steve Smith or whomever. That's not the way it works. The way it works is that it allows us now to know, oh, wait a minute, we're looking for a certain race, a certain culture, a certain ancestry, and most importantly, with a certain color eyes and a certain color hair color and a certain facial freckles in this case. So we can now take people that we had an interest in, but if they didn't have the eye color, the hair color, the ancestry, we didn't eliminate them altogether, but we put them on the bottom of the list. So I would say that the Parabon snapshot, the phenotyping, was a monster in 2018, a monster beginning for us, okay? Again, the families, nobody looked at that and said, oh, yeah, that's so. That wasn't what we were looking in. Now we knew we had a person of Scottish extraction and we became pretty expert at eye color and hair color.
I think that that's important to bring up, because we used that eye color. I mean, that was the biggest part for us, because people that have, brown eyes,
can't change your eye color.
No, they went to the bottom, and there was a lot of them. I mean, I remember we moved those files from one drawer to another, basically, of people that we were looking at or interested in. And that was a huge help to us. I mean, the freckling really there was a percentage of freckling. We really couldn't pay much attention to that.
Yes.
Hair color obviously is, hair color that can be changed. But eye color was a solid for us when we, got that information. I remember that was a big day for us when we had that little bit of, something to go on here.
Yes, and it was huge because it says through their magic, through their genius, where this person's family, the familia, where they're from. Oh, they're Germanic. Oh, okay. Or they're from Eastern Europe, wherever it was. That's what you're looking for. So now you have a real sense of who your person is.
I think one thing that that allowed us to do not only was to put people with the darker colored eyes to the bottom, but it gave us a little bit more to the point where when we kind of felt like we were stuck in this case, one of the things that we ended up doing was we had taken large sheets of butcher paper and put it all over the cold case office, and we had written down every fact of the case. Nothing that was opinion. It was all facts in this case that was on it. And I don't know how many sheets it was. It was
a dozen. I forgot this.
Yeah, we put all of them and taped them up and wrote on them the facts in marker on it.
Yes.
And at some point we invited the family in. We got all of the families together, brought them into a conference room, and we had this paper taped to the walls. And said, who is this? Who is this? And I mean, it had, the temperature being turned down in the house. It had the eye color stuff. It had all of the facts, the cigarette, the brand of cigarette. It had all of the stuff. And we had a notebook sitting in front of each one of them with a pen and said, write down who you think this might be. And we came up with very few names.
Yeah.
It was actually, I don't know if there was any really. Yeah. No. There was really nothing because the family didn't know.
No.
But we used that piece of evidence or that piece of information, to help us come up with that list and put that on the list and narrow down the suspect list.
And again, what does that tell you, Captain? That tells you that both sides of the family who were adamantly wanting to solve this case, they'd tried everything. They'd racked their brains. They'd even have schisms develop in families because they thought maybe somebody did it. I mean, they were passionate about finding out who did this to their loved ones. And it didn't produce anything. My only point being, it goes back and tells you about our offender and the way this crime presented. This is a person who doesn't go to the county jail for an arrest, starts in a drunken stupor confessing to another criminal in the jail cell. The family genuinely did not know. It was a true mystery. And once we then progressed from phenotyping onto the new, what is now the new rage, genetic genealogy, that was a historic moment for us on this case.
One of the things I want to talk about before we get to that point is the lack of tip information on this case. I know we touched on it a little bit. Let's go a little bit more in depth on, I mean, we did get tips. It's not like we didn't get any. We did get some, and some were people just basically think, saying, I think this is who did it. You need to look here. You need to look there. And, didn't take into account that we had DNA on things and all sorts of stuff. But we really never got any solid tips. And I think one of the things is when this case initially came out and happened in the 70s, a lot of the case information that would normally be, hold back information was actually given to the public and the media. And so, they were trying to fit look at people that they knew to fit that.
Gotcha.
And so we did get some of those, but there really was a lack of tips that came in on this case with a, viable suspect. And a lot of that is because the suspect probably didn't open his mouth.
Exactly.
For those simple reason that, I don't know if we've mentioned in this case, but the female victim, all of her clothing was taken from the scene. We're talking underclothing, all of it was taken.
Yes.
So I think there's a reason why this individual, our suspect in the case, did not mention it to anyone.
It's shame.
Right.
It's shame. Right. Even a sex sadistic killer has that shame component. Matter of fact, it's part of the payoff.
Right.
And when we did a psychological autopsy on this gentleman and a historical autopsy, that night, as the captain just said, uh, this gentleman went back down into the basement to the clothes hamper, took all of her uh, soiled feminine garments with him. He actually used, because he was, so here was back where it was sophisticated and unsophisticated. He had to take one of their suitcases
Mm-hmm.
and fill it with her work shoes of an erotic nature, her undergarments, anything related to that. And he took it with him as what are commonly called trophies.
Yep.
And then when we did a psychological autopsy with a family member of his after he was identified, they dropped a bombshell on us and told us, oh, yeah, he had done that before.
Yeah, something similar in nature that definitely fit that. So, yeah, I just that's one thing that when you're working cold cases, you look at tips, and
Yes.
in working cases, it's not unusual for people, and people might find this unusual, but you'll get people that confess to these crimes that didn't do it
Yes.
for credibility reasons and
Yes.
or notoriety or what. And that's the reason for holdback information. That's the
Yes.
reason why there's things that aren't disclosed to the public, so you
Yes.
can have those little things that only the killer, you, and maybe the victim or not would know.
Yes. And so many of these times in your cases where maybe there are drugs involved, maybe not, but they're of a certain criminal element that they just can't wait to share with Joe and Bob and Sam and Charlie what they did. Well, like you say, Captain, we got none of that.
No.
Absolutely none.
Level of shame and not accepted.
And it's here, and I can kind of prove that point here, which was going to be one of the later last points, but this was the money shot to me. Later on in this investigation, after things were really rolling, a $100,000 reward, the largest reward ever posted in the state of Montana, by the way, was posted by an anonymous donor seeking information. And in that one, we were very excited, if you remember. Oh, this is going to really but we got 0 tips.
Yeah.
On 100,000. That's life-changing money for people.
We looked at some things on that. I mean, as far as did the suspect die right after that happened?
Right,
I mean,
right.
was he imprisoned for some reason right after that happened? I mean,
Right.
what shut that down?
Right.
As to why we didn't get any.
As to why we didn't. And then when we again autopsied this after successful closure, it only, to your audience, confirms the highly personal nature of this crime that this suspect felt deep shame over. Crimes of a sadistic, sexual nature, those are secrets that the offender cherishes, and he wants to hold on to them. He doesn't want to gift them to anybody else. He took it to his grave, as best we can tell.
Yeah. We
got not one tip for $100,000. There are many people here that would turn in their own brother for $50, much less $100,000. Yeah. The only other things too that I had on this after we had come to a successful conclusion that we talked about before, sticking with the evidence, taking contemporaneous notes. I want to reiterate again about the overwhelming percentage of cases where it is someone they know, if it is one of those cases. That's going to be in the first 50 or 100 pages of your book.
You hope so.
You hope so, but I go with statistics. So is it 100%? No, it's not. In this case, our guy was listed merely as a co-worker out of 118.
And that was it.
And that was it. And he was listed as being at their funeral.
Right.
And I just wanted to mention here, too, that many times for your listeners and anybody who wants to get involved with this, suspects will attend funerals, maybe sometimes up to being a pallbearer or a lead speaker or somebody who's weeping the loudest, being the most dramatic, and he's the one that did it. Not every time, but in this particular case, our killer had the temerity to show up at their funeral. And then, most importantly, Captain, where Reserve Deputy Wallace came up with the title. This, I got to be careful how I speak here. This guy had the temerity, the nerve, to go back to Ryan's grocery after he murders her, rapes and murders her, and stays there and works for a period of time. And then he goes over to the city and stays here another 10 years.
Yeah, I think it was in solid waste or something.
Yes. No, it's exactly where it was.
What do you remember what he did at Ryan's?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, Captain.
For a reason.
For a reason, because remember, folks in the audience, our offender, and this was a very early cold November,
Snowstorm that night.
Yes, sir. This guy opens every window into the home. This is a whole other thing we could talk about, but opened up every window into the home, closed the heating vents. He then went to the thermostat and set it to the lowest degree of 45 on the thermostat, making the house between 39 and 40 degrees ambient when deputies arrived the next morning. Now, this sadistic killer knew enough about, and again, forgive me for talking about stuff like this, but you need to hear it. He knew enough about decomposition with animals and humans. He was artificially trying to manipulate the time of death. And Vinny, why don't you tell the folks where he worked?
Well, in the meat department of the Ryans, so obviously dealing with refrigeration and those type of things.
So to him, again, no disrespect on earth, but they were meat to be dealt with. So he could set up his alibi.
Yeah, I mean, obviously trying to skew the time and allow a suitable alibi for himself, if that was to come up. So
yeah, more than likely, I guess we could say.
Yeah.
The other last thing, too, was that he, we found out many, many, many things after his being identified and finding out that he had died in Christmas time of, I think it was 2003.
Mm-hmm.
But in talking to family members and so forth about all these different issues and a bunch of other sensitive stuff I'm not going to talk about here. One of the things we did talk about was how, did he smoke Winston's all the time? And the family member said, what? He didn't smoke. He never smoked.
Right.
And it just, again, we can scientifically, without any doubt, none, zero, prove that the same person who committed the murder smoked those cigarettes that night.
Right. Yep. The DNA matches.
And it always went back to our theory of why were they half smoked?
Which, we'll never know.
Yeah.
Yeah. We can make guesses on it, but we don't know. And yeah, there's just a lot of unanswered questions like we touched on earlier that we won't ever know.
Right.
One of the things that we should speak about to a point is it's very important when you get these cases and look at these kind of cases to really look at the autopsy reports.
Yes.
The medical examiner.
Yes.
Those folks, I mean, they're experts in what they do and they know what they're doing. And even back in the 70s, the reports were, very good. And, looking at a lot of specifics in going into this case, you had to look at specifics because there really wasn't, broad strokes with this case.
Nope.
And looking at specifics of stomach contents and how much food was left on the table, there was a lot of speculation that there was a third person at dinner that night, which we, that was been discussed. I think it was put in the media, and that's just not what happened.
Yes.
Looking at this and the stomach contents and how much food was there and that type of thing, that was not what happened.
Yes.
And, getting into those specifics and looking at the sperm that was found and, whether they had tails or not and how the time frame of when the tails fall off.
Going backwards.
Yeah. From the time of the autopsy going backwards,
yes.
You got to look at specific things like that help narrow down your timeline to say, yeah, that definitely was the person. They either, they did the murder or they, initiated sex with a corpse afterwards, and we know that didn't happen.
Yes.
So that's how specific this stuff has to get. I mean, there's a lot to it, and specificity is a big thing. So,
well, and you're right, and you pull together all of it based on the sperm, the live tail's shelf life, if you will, going reverse engineering, going backwards, taking you towards time of death, trying to determine a time of death. You actually wired in the stomach contents perfectly based on what we had left in the skillet, and then based on what were in the victim's stomach, that added up to 100%.
And I think when we looked at photographs from the scene, we could see that there was only two places where somebody could sit, and there wasn't three. So
it was a media creation. It was exciting because, no offense to them, but they're there to sell papers and whatnot, and their message was they made their killer dinner.
Yeah.
If I saw that thing one more gosh darn time,
right,
I was going to spit.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't it. And then Mother, in her complete shock, of course, nothing nefarious, in her complete shock, goes in and starts trying to clean things up, understandably.
Yeah. She was definitely in a state of shock when that happened.
Absolutely.
And to our knowledge, it didn't destroy any evidence.
No.
Nothing that we saw didn't destroy any evidence. So.
No. And frankly, in her modesty, covering her daughter, she solved the case again there.
I mean, to a point, it did not hurt the case.
No.
So, all good info. Wow. Anything else?
Well, I can sit here all day and talk, but a lot of it would be getting off into the speculative things that we can't do. Like Sheriff Linder said, if it's speculation, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, man. There's just no room for that.
Nope.
We got to stick to the facts, and that's the way you solve these cases. Like I mentioned a couple times. I mean, we'll never know exactly what happened and went down there, but we can kind of draw some thoughts and theories on it. But to say it and be confident about it, absolutely not.
Yes.
So, but anything else?
No, I would just say again to anybody listening, particularly people who are thinking about getting into this and so forth, and any agency who's looking to start it, just bear in mind the Sheriff Linder and Captain Wallace credo. Yeah, prove it.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot to that. You definitely have to prove it. There's always that difference between, what you know and what you can prove.
Yeah.
What you think and what you can prove.
You have magical thinkers like me and guys like this looking me in the eye and just saying, great, prove it to me.
What did you think about working with the family, Scott?
Oh, I mean, it was an honor of a lifetime. My God. Won't say by name or anything, but one of the close family members is a fellow 1st Air Cavalry of Clifford Sergeant, Bronze Star recipient himself, who still to this day, when we see each other, he gets deeply emotional. And I can just only imagine if it was one of our loved ones, our children, our grandchildren, it would be so incomprehensibly awful that this happened. And that's kind of when we went back to the beginning of the conversation today. It's like there are so many times we wanted to be able to reach out and share with the community and share certainly with the families, but you just cannot do that.
No.
And yet they knew ultimately that we were still working the case all those years later. And that's just a truth. Nobody can take that away. And it breaks our heart on some of the ones that we haven't reached a conclusion yet. But I would tell the audience that we are still there all these years later working these cases, because fundamentally there's something deeply wrong with these criminals who prey on innocent victims. I sound like I'm not. I'm just telling you the truth. We're there working them to make these people be held accountable for their actions.
Yeah, we're coming for those people.
We're coming. Don't sleep comfortably. Again, hacked here, but don't sleep comfortably, buddy. With genetic genealogy, we are looking at many cases right now.
Any idea what the future holds for
that's
cold
a
case
great question.
technology?
That's
I mean, this is a
question.
couple questions I want to ask some of the other people I hope to have on the program in the future. But any ideas on speculation on your part?
Oh, yes. But 20 years from now, what I thought 20 years ago was impossible will be possible then. And they are going to be able to do things between autosomal DNA, SNPs, phenotyping. They are going to be able to do things that I couldn't dream of now. So and these are taken from true scientists. These are brilliant men and women who know their stuff. They are as committed as you have been for 30 years in arresting bad guys, as we've been committed to volunteering to help Cold Case Unit. These people are committed to their science, to their craft. These are brilliant young men and women. 20 years from now, well, how old am I now? I'm trying to figure if I'm going to be there. We are going to have cases solved just like that because of this. So I would advise all of you bad criminals out there, think twice before you do it, because we're watching.
We've definitely developed some strong relationships with a lot of scientists over the years,
Yes,
and that's a big deal. I mean, to have those people that you can contact and say, where are we headed on this? What do you think can we get anything from this?
Yes.
The technology now is so much more finite than it was.
Yes.
So those are good relationships to have.
Yes. Well, you want those in your hip pocket.
Absolutely.
You have to be able to reach out to each other. It's no different than your best practices in law enforcement.
Right.
You didn't just gain them overnight by yourself. No, that's from talking to all of your partners and agencies all around. And that's what it's, Captain, it is what I would call, cold case, ongoing education.
Right.
Honest.
Well, I agree. Any parting words, Scott?
No, it's just been an honor, and I appreciate you and the sheriff and Reserve Deputy Wallace and everybody for letting me be a part of it.
Absolutely. And we appreciate you being here and helping us out. And thank you for being here today.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate you. The views and opinions expressed by the guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Any parties mentioned in whole or part of an investigation are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. All opinions given by the host are my own.